Okay, you see this number right here? Your ninja rating is the number of enemies you defeated with melee attacks. The melee weapons of choice in this game are chainsaws. Chainsaw ninjas? I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty cool. I don't get it. I really don't. I've been playing this game every so often since it was first released, and yet for several days, only a single person had even attempted to guess what today's episode was going to cover. You see, today's Ancient DOS game is Cyberdogs, and it is quite simply a fun, cathartic game filled with big guns, zombies, and cyborgs. Best of all, despite the fact that this game ripped sound effects from other violent games such as Doom, the game itself isn't violent enough that I have to warn everyone ahead of time, with the enemies simply phasing into white ashes when you kill them. There's other things that make this game fun too, but first let's get into the game stats. Cyberdogs was created and released by Ronnie Wester in 1994 and is a 1-to-2 player action game. It features VGA 320x200 256 color graphics and support for the Sound Blaster, Pro Audio Spectrum, and Gravis Ultrasound cards. And there's some issues with getting the sound working properly in DOSBox, which I'll go into later, but what it comes down to is that its Sound Blaster support seems to be the best choice. As for its release date, the game has always been freeware, and as a result has shown up in numerous game compilation archives. I'd link you to the official Cyberdogs website, but it kinda disappeared around 2007. So instead I'm just going to recommend a place that I know has a working download, the DOS Games website at www.dosgames.com. So the story of the game is even more paper thin than last week's game. Zombies and cyborgs have invaded various military bases and you must go in and retrieve any objects left behind, kill any bad guys to get in the way, and destroy anything important that could be used by these bad guys, such as computers, desks, and energy reactors. Yeah, that's it. I think. I'm just piecing that together from what little information there is on the story in the game's README file. As you can see from the gameplay so far, it's an incredibly simple game. You just go around and shoot stuff. Before you actually begin playing though, you start on the main menu, which sort of acts like a hub upon which you can choose your options, your campaign number, the Cyberdog you want to play as, and your control settings. Once you're all set, you can start your campaign, which will consist of 10 pseudo-randomly generated missions based on the campaign number you chose and whether or not you're playing a 1 or 2 player game. Before each mission, you're given your objectives and are also shown what kind of enemies you'll be up against. There are 3 different objectives a mission can have: collect objects, eliminate enemies, and destroy structures. The objects you can find consist of special documents, important file folders, disks containing critical information, and top secret circuit boards. Though you also have to keep an eye out for teddy bears belonging to the Admiral's daughter, because apparently he can't get any work done when she's upset. You're also given a list of the kinds of enemies you'll be faced with. There's 6 different kinds of enemies. Basic zombies, which aren't really much of a threat and can be killed pretty easily. Cyborgs, which have a huge amount of hit points and can cause plenty of damage, but are very slow. Red zombies, which move fast and have powerful melee attacks, but very little health. Black zombies, which are basically stronger versions of the red zombies. Goggle zombies, which have a fair amount of health and a fairly strong attack. And the Cyborg Plus, which is essentially a walking death machine, but really isn't much different than the Goggle zombies, aside from having even stronger attacks. The list of enemies also includes percentages to indicate how many of each kind of enemy you should expect to face. For instance, if there's going to be 85% standard zombies, 10% Goggle zombies, and 5% red zombies, this means that on average, for every 20 enemies you'll face, 17 will be standard zombies, 2 will be Goggle zombies, and 1 will be a red zombie. Later missions will have larger percentages of the tougher zombies, and the first mission, no matter what campaign number you're playing, will always have 100% basic zombies. After the briefing, you get to buy and sell equipment. Extra lives are exactly as they sound, letting you respawn if you die, but keep in mind that 0 is not a life in this game. So if you only have 1 life left and you lose it, it's game over. Armor is essentially your health, and while you start with 20 armor points, you can buy up to a maximum of 50, or even sell armor off down to a minimum of 5. Chainsaws improve the amount of melee damage you can inflict by simply walking into an opponent. With a level 5 chainsaw, you can ninja most enemies to death with little effort, but you still have to be careful of the ones that have powerful melee attacks and lots of health, such as the Cyborg++. But then we have the guns. This game has a nice selection of hardware, so let's give each one a little bit of attention. The cheapest weapon you can acquire is the blaster. It does minimal damage, has normal range, and a fair rate of fire. It's very weak, but also very cheap, and while you might think it's a good starting weapon, it's actually better suited for veteran players who want to save as much money in the short run as possible and score higher accuracy bonuses. Next, we have the power gun. This is the weapon I recommend most players start with. It does enough damage to take out enemies in either 1 or 2 hits, and it has long range, so you don't have to worry about an enemy being too far away to hit. Its only drawbacks is that the ammo for it costs twice as much as for the blaster, and the rate of fire is very low, so if you miss, you're going to be vulnerable for a moment. Plus, because it takes so few shots to kill anything with this gun, your accuracy bonus, should you get one, isn't going to be as great. Next up is the Flamer. This weapon's also well suited for beginners because it not only has rapid fire, but the flames are very big and hard to miss with. Not to mention it does slightly more damage than the blaster per shot with the same cost of ammo. The catch is that it's very short ranged, so your target has to be pretty close to you before you can fry it. Next up is the minigun, which is just like the Flamer except it has normal range and smaller shots. It's a good intermediate weapon since its ammo costs a little more than the previous weapons, but isn't anywhere near as expensive to use as the next 2 explosive weapons. The launcher is the next weapon, which shoots grenades that explode after a fair distance or on impact, damaging any enemies caught in the blast. Structures, however, will only take damage from direct hits. The weapon itself is a little less powerful than the power gun, meaning some enemies will still take more than 1 hit, but the blast radius makes it easy to hit things, even if they're on the other side of a wall. The ammo's kind of expensive though, and explosive weapons don't count towards your accuracy bonus at the end of the mission. But lastly, we have the Mega Gun. This thing is just ridiculous. It can destroy absolutely anything in 1 hit, except for the special structures that you have to take out, which take 2 hits. And it has an even larger blast radius than the launcher, making it really easy to take out large groups of tough enemies in a single shot. The drawback? The ammo for this gun is about 20 times more expensive than the blaster, so until you're making large amounts of money and getting consistent time bonuses, you'll want to hold off getting this gun. Now, even though you can carry multiple weapons and switch between them at will, I recommend you stick with a single gun for each level, just to make things simpler. Though, one thing that can help early on is to carry a minimally loaded launcher with you so that if your path gets blocked by something destructible, you can just blast your way through it without hurting any accuracy bonuses you might get. Now, I've been focusing on the game's basic elements rather than the gameplay itself because the gameplay itself is really as simple as it looks. Well, there's one interesting aspect. Those of you who've played Blaster Master on the NES know that there's a particular button you can hold down to strafe. Well, the change weapon button in Cyberdogs also acts as your strafing button. You have to stand perfectly still and press and release the change weapon button to actually change weapons. To strafe, you just hold the button down and move. Strafing basically locks the direction you're facing in so that no matter which direction you move in, you continue to face and shoot in only one direction. It's useful early on, but later when you start spamming Mega Gun shots everywhere, it kinda loses most of its usefulness. I do also want to point out that in the game's options, you can choose whether to allow moving while firing always, or moving while firing only while strafing. I highly recommend setting this to always because if you don't, firing your guns without strafing makes you stay perfectly still, and in this game, staying still can be a death sentence. The one big feature that really makes this game fun though is its cooperative multiplayer support. Mind you, both players do keep their own score and money, but you're essentially working towards the same goal, so you can either choose to play it cooperatively, or you can compete for the highest score. Works either way. Playing multiplayer in this game adds a few more elements to the gameplay too. For starters, everything is doubled. The enemies are doubled, the objectives are doubled, the items you can find are doubled. Yeah, basically everything's doubled. Additionally, every map will have at least one gold skull hidden somewhere, which provides a temporary extra life. And I say temporary because you lose these extra lives once the mission is concluded, presuming you haven't lost them already. Also, the players can't hurt each other, so feel free to blast away like a maniac. One quirk of multiplayer, though, is having both players on the keyboard. DOS games with two players playing simultaneously are rare since keyboards can't respond to more than a handful of key presses at once. So if you're going to play this game multiplayer, someone has to be using a joystick or gamepad, otherwise the key lockups are simply unbearable. You also need to decide on your split screen and life pooling settings. You can either have the split screen going constantly, only going when the two players are a certain distance apart from each other, or simply not allow split screen at all, forcing both players to stick together. I recommend always having split screen going, as it can be very difficult to follow the players otherwise. You can also choose whether the players can share lives or not. I generally turn life pooling off for the simple fact that if one player loses all their lives in multiplayer, but the other completes the mission, the one who lost all their lives is just reset to starting conditions, so sharing lives in this game seems kind of pointless. I suppose my only complaint about the game really is that it's too easy. The friend I was playing with generally isn't much into retro games, yet with minimal practice we managed to get to the end of a full campaign without getting our butts kicked, and our final scores were almost identical. So really, this is a game you play just because you want to kill things and blow stuff up. It's a stress reliever, since once you get going and get far enough to get yourself a mega gun with a couple hundred rounds of ammo, you're not going to die. Everything else is going to die, and it will be very satisfying. Now, I don't really have much in the way of tips, but I do have a couple. Firstly, early in a campaign, the time bonuses are nearly impossible to get and not worth much in the first place, so instead, focus on finding the hidden guns. In a one-player game, each mission has one hidden gun, and in a two-player game, there's two. You can sell these guns for lots of money, or if you already have them, you get a substantial amount of ammo for them, which is also worth a lot of money to sell. Once you're about halfway through a campaign and you have yourself armed with a mega gun, that's when you can start focusing on the time bonuses, because they'll be much easier to get. And secondly, you are actually able to leave a mission before it's completed, but doing so will only net you destruction and accuracy bonuses. But then again, if you're in big trouble and don't know where to get some easy armor, it might be your only way to survive. One final thing I want to mention is that even though the options screen limits you to choosing 3 campaign numbers, 0, 17, and 4711, you can actually choose any campaign number you want between 0 and 65,535. All you have to do is start Cyberdogs with the command line parameter -C number, with number being the campaign number you want. Actually, if you omit the number completely and just use -C, you'll be given a completely random campaign number. So yeah, Cyberdogs is a simple, fun action game. A bit easy, but still fun, and that's ultimately what matters. It's a really underappreciated game, so I recommend all of you into DOS shooters or action games give this one a try. You won't be disappointed. But now, let's bring up the DOSBox settings, because there's a bit to say this time around. Firstly, you want to leave the cycles count set to auto. Secondly, you need to disable Gravis ultrasound support by setting gust to false. The reason for this is that Cyberdogs uses the gust by default if it's available, but half of the time the sounds will sound like they're very distant for reasons not related to how distant they really are, and that's very distracting. But this is even further complicated because Cyberdogs can't detect DOSBox's Sound Blaster 16 support properly, so you also have to set the SB type value to something older, such as SB Pro 2. Lastly, if you're going to use a joystick or gamepad, you have to turn off timed intervals, otherwise the only directions you'll be able to move are up and left. Well, that's all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games. Stay tuned for episode 53, where we're going to take a look at a game where you have to worry about gravity, fuel, and oxygen. If you think you know what game that is, then send your guess to ADG@pixelships.com and tune in next Saturday to see this fast-paced game in action.